The destruction of the first Queen ship proved that humanity could fight back, but it also brought something unexpected. The swarm responded with fury. More ships arrived from deep space, pouring into the solar system like an endless flood. For every Queen ship humanity destroyed, 2 more appeared to take its place. The war that everyone hoped would be quick and decisive became a grinding struggle of attrition. Earth's defenders were being worn down, losing ships faster than they could build new ones. Admiral Patricia Cross sat in her command center, staring at reports that got worse every day. The casualty numbers were staggering. Entire crews lost, colonies evacuated, resources running low. She knew that humanity could not win this war alone. They needed help. For years, scientists had detected signals from other civilizations, proof that intelligent life existed beyond Earth and the swarm. It was time to reach out, even if it meant exposing Earth's location to unknown dangers. Patricia made the decision and began planning a diplomatic mission. Captain Holly Chen was chosen to lead that mission. Holly was young for a captain, only 32 years old, but she had something special. She could talk to anyone, make connections, build trust. Before the war, she had been a diplomat, negotiating trade agreements between Earth and the Mars colonies. Now she would take those skills into deep space. Patricia gave her command of the USS Explorer, a ship equipped with the fastest engines humanity had ever built. The Explorer could travel farther and faster than any vessel in the fleet. Holly's mission was simple but dangerous. Find other intelligent species and convince them to join the fight against the swarm. She had no idea where to look or what she would find. The signals Earth had detected came from multiple star systems, but they were old, sometimes decades old. The civilizations that sent them might not exist anymore. The swarm might have already consumed them. But Holly had to try. She assembled a crew of scientists, linguists, and soldiers, then set course for the nearest signal source. 30 light-years from Earth, back in the solar system, Commodore Daniel Hayes recovered from his injuries. The Freedom had been badly damaged during the Queen ship attack, and Daniel had been hurt when part of the bridge collapsed. He spent 3 weeks in the medical bay, healing broken bones and dealing with the nightmares that came every night. When he was finally released, he was recalled to Earth. Admiral Cross needed him to help coordinate the defense. The battles were coming faster now, and humanity needed every experienced commander they had. Daniel worked alongside General Stephen Blake, who had been promoted and given command of all ground-based and boarding operations. The 2 men had different styles but respected each other. Daniel was methodical and careful. Stephen was aggressive and bold. Together, they made a good team. They spent long hours planning new tactics, studying the swarm's patterns, looking for weaknesses to exploit. Lieutenant Nicole Wright became something of a legend among the Rangers. Her successful boarding of the first alien vessel had made her famous, but she did not let it change her. She kept training, kept pushing herself and her team. When the swarm attacked the lunar colonies, Nicole and her Rangers were there. The aliens breached the habitat domes, flooding the corridors with toxic atmosphere and their insect-like soldiers. Nicole led her team in a desperate defense, fighting room by room, corridor by corridor. The battle for the lunar colonies lasted 6 days. Nicole barely slept, moving from one firefight to another, always where the fighting was worst. She saved thousands of civilian lives through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. She learned to predict how the swarm soldiers would move, where they would attack. She adapted her tactics constantly, staying 1 step ahead. When the swarm finally retreated, Nicole had earned the respect of every soldier in the defense force. Her methods became required study for all Rangers. Meanwhile, 30 light-years from Earth, Holly Chen and the Explorer arrived at their destination. The star system looked dead at first, the planets dark and cold, but as they moved deeper, they detected signs of life on the 4th planet. Ships in orbit, cities on the surface, and something else. Weapons tracking the Explorer, ready to fire. Holly ordered her crew to broadcast peaceful intentions on every frequency. They waited, tense and ready to run if necessary. After an hour that felt like forever, they received a response. It came in a language the Explorer's computers did not recognize, but the tone was clear enough. Cautious, suspicious, ready for violence. Holly worked with her linguist to establish communication. It took days of back and forth, sending mathematical sequences and basic concepts, slowly building a shared vocabulary. Finally, they were able to talk. The beings called themselves the Kelthari, They were reptilian in appearance, standing upright on two legs, covered in scales that ranged from green to bronze. Their leader, a warrior named Vexthon, agreed to meet with Holly aboard a neutral station in orbit. Holly took 2 guards with her and went, knowing this meeting could determine humanity's survival. Vexthon was huge, nearly 7 feet tall, with scars covering his scales. He looked at Holly with eyes that had seen too much war. "You come seeking alliance," he said through a translation device. His voice was harsh, like rocks grinding together. "Why should we help you?" Holly did not try to sugarcoat the truth. She showed him footage of the swarm attacks. She explained how humanity was fighting for survival against an enemy that could not be reasoned with. She told him about the queen ships, about the collective consciousness, about the civilizations the swarm had consumed. Vexthon watched it all in silence. "The swarm took our colonies 30 years ago," he finally said. "They enslaved millions of our people. We fought them to a standstill, but barely. We have been alone in this fight for too long." He paused, studying Holly. "Your species shows spirit. You fight when you should have died. Perhaps together, we can do more than survive. Perhaps we can strike back." The alliance was formed. The Kelthari had technology and experience that humanity desperately needed. Their ships were built for prolonged combat against the swarm, with weapons that could penetrate enemy shields and armor that could withstand incredible punishment. More importantly, they had knowledge. They knew the location of the swarm's home system, the central hub from which all their attacks originated. They knew about the primary queen, the central intelligence that controlled the entire collective consciousness. Holly sent word back to Earth about the alliance. The message took months to arrive, but when it did, it changed everything. Admiral Cross immediately began planning joint operations with the Kelthari. Ships from both species trained together, learning each other's tactics, sharing technology. The Kelthari were amazed by human adaptability and creativity. Humans were impressed by Kelthari's strength and discipline. The first combined human-Kelthari operation was the defense of Saturn's rings. The swarm had been attacking Titan colony for weeks, trying to capture the valuable resources there. Admiral Jake Sullivan, who had distinguished himself in earlier battles, led the counterattack. His fleet now included 20 Kelthari warships fighting alongside 50 human vessels. The swarm had never faced a coordinated attack from 2 species before. They did not know how to adapt. The battle was fierce but decisive. Sullivan used human speed and maneuverability to harass the enemy, while Kelthari ships delivered devastating broadsides. The swarm fleet was crushed and Titan colony was saved. For the first time since the war began, humanity had won a major victory without losing half their fleet in the process. Morale soared. People dared to hope. But Daniel Hayes knew the war was not over. He studied the intelligence Holly had brought back from the Kelthari. The swarm's home system was heavily defended, with thousands of ships and countless orbital defenses. Taking the fight there would be the most dangerous thing humanity had ever attempted, but it was also the only way to end the war. Destroy the primary queen, and the entire swarm collective would collapse. Daniel presented his plan to Admiral Cross and the military council. It was audacious and terrifying. Every ship, every soldier, every resource humanity and the Kelthari had would be committed to one massive assault on the swarm homeworld. There would be no reserves, no backup plan. They would either achieve total victory or die trying. The council debated for days, but in the end they approved the operation. It was called Endgame, and it would determine the fate of both species. Preparations began immediately. Ships were repaired and upgraded. Soldiers trained for the largest military operation in history. Scientists developed new weapons. Engineers pushed technology to its limits. Every person on Earth knew what was coming. They knew that in a few months humanity would gamble everything on one desperate throw of the dice. Some people were terrified. Others were grimly determined. All of them understood that their children's future depended on what happened next. The stage was set for the final battle, and there would be no second chances. The fleet that assembled for the assault on the swarm homeworld was the largest military force humanity had ever created. 400 human ships and 200 Kelthari vessels gathered at the edge of the solar system, an armada representing the combined might of 2 civilizations. Every ship carried a full crew, and every crew member understood the stakes. This was not just another battle. This was the end, one way or another. They would either destroy the swarm or be destroyed trying. Admiral Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Freedom, fully recovered from his injuries and promoted once again. The Freedom had been completely rebuilt after the Queenship attack, stronger and more capable than before. Maya Johnson stood beside him as captain, a partnership that had been forged through years of combat. They trusted each other completely, could anticipate each other's thoughts. That trust would be vital in the battle to come. General Stephen Blake commanded the ground forces, the thousands of Rangers who would have the most dangerous job of all. Their mission was to board the Primary Queen's vessel and destroy her directly. Without the Primary Queen's guiding intelligence, the entire swarm collective would collapse into chaos. It was a suicide mission and everyone knew it. But Stephen had no shortage of volunteers. Every Ranger wanted to be part of the team that ended this war. Lieutenant Nicole Wright was Stephen's second in command. She had proven herself in countless battles, earned the respect of every soldier under her command. Her tactical brilliance and unshakable courage made her the perfect choice to lead the boarding teams. She spent the weeks before the attack training her people, making sure everyone knew their role. She also wrote letters to her family just in case. She was not afraid to die, but she wanted them to know she had fought for something that mattered. The journey to the swarm homeworld took 3 weeks at maximum faster than light speed. During that time, the crews trained constantly. Gunners practiced their targeting. Engineers ran simulations of damage control. Pilots rehearsed their maneuvers. Captain Holly Chen, who had brought the Kelthari alliance to humanity, now served as the diplomatic liaison between both fleets. She worked to ensure that humans and Kelthari coordinated their tactics perfectly, that there would be no confusion or miscommunication during the battle. Vex, then, the Kelthari commander, met with Daniel several times during the journey. The two leaders discussed strategy, shared intelligence, and built mutual respect. Vex then had been fighting the swarm for 30 years. He had lost friends, family, entire worlds to their endless hunger. This battle for him was personal. He understood what Daniel and the humans were feeling because he had felt it himself for decades. When the combined fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, they found themselves facing the full might of the swarm empire. The enemy homeworld hung before them like a diseased eye, a planet covered in industrial structures and hive complexes. Thousands of ships filled the space around it, layer upon layer of defensive formations. The Primary Queen's vessel was immediately visible, a massive structure in high orbit that looked more like a city than a ship. It was protected by concentric rings of defenders, each one ready to die protecting their queen. Admiral Patricia Cross, commanding from far in the rear aboard the USS Titan, gave the order that everyone had been waiting for. All ships attack, for Earth, for humanity, for freedom. The combined fleet surged forward, and space erupted into the largest battle in recorded history. Human and Kelthari ships fought side by side, their weapons tearing into the swarm defensive lines. The enemy responded with overwhelming firepower, and ships began dying immediately on both sides. Explosions lit up the darkness. Debris filled the void. People screamed and fought and died in the cold of space. Daniel directed the assault with calm precision, his voice steady over the command channel. He had studied the swarm's defensive formations for months and knew where the weak points were. He directed ships to concentrate fire on specific targets, breaking through the enemy lines piece by piece. Admiral Jake Sullivan commanded the left flank, his battle group hammering the enemy positions, drawing defenders away from the primary target. Lieutenant Ben Carter, now a wing commander, led his fighters through gaps in the enemy formation, clearing paths for the capital ships to follow. The battle raged for 18 hours without pause. Both sides took terrible losses. Human ships exploded under concentrated fire. Kelthari vessels were torn apart by swarm weapons. But slowly, meter by meter, the combined fleet pushed forward. They fought their way through the outer defensive ring, then the middle ring. The cost was horrific, but they were getting closer to the Primary Queen's vessel. When the opening finally came, General Stephen Blake launched his assault teams. Dozens of boarding craft, escorted by fighters, streaked toward the massive Queen ship. The swarm defenders swarmed around them like angry insects, destroying many of the transports before they could reach their target. But enough got through. Stephen was in the first wave along with Nicole Wright and her Rangers. They hit the Queen ship's hull and began cutting through. Nicole was first through the breach, just as she had been on the first alien ship they had ever boarded. But this was different. The corridors inside the primary Queen's vessel were enormous, built on a scale that made humans feel tiny. The walls pulsed with organic material that seemed alive, responding to their presence. The atmosphere was thick and toxic, burning their lungs even through their suit filters. And the swarm soldiers that came at them were larger and more dangerous than any they had faced before. The Rangers fought with desperate intensity. Every meter forward was earned with blood. Stephen Blake led from the front, refusing to ask his people to go anywhere he would not go himself. Nicole coordinated the advance, directing teams to cover each other, calling out threats, making split-second tactical decisions. People died around her, good soldiers who had trained together for months, but she could not stop to grieve, not yet, not until this was over. Dr. Lisa Grant, serving as scientific advisor with the boarding team, guided them toward the Queen's chamber. She had studied the data from every captured swarm vessel, had built a mental map of how their ships were structured. The primary Queen would be at the very center, protected by layers of defenders and biological systems. They had to reach her and destroy her directly. Nothing else would end this war. The corridors grew stranger as they pushed deeper. The walls seemed to breathe. Strange sounds echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Some Rangers started seeing things that were not there, hallucinations brought on by the Queen's psychic influence. Nicole kept them focused, kept them moving forward. They could not afford to stop, could not afford to doubt. Finally, after hours of brutal fighting, they reached the core. The chamber was vast, lit by a sickly green light, and in the center, suspended by cables and tubes, was the primary Queen. She was enormous, a grotesque fusion of biology and technology that filled half the chamber. Her psychic presence was overwhelming, pressing down on their minds like a physical weight. Several Rangers collapsed, their minds unable to handle the pressure, but Stephen and Nicole pushed forward. "Plant the charges," Stephen ordered, his voice tight with effort. "End this nightmare." Nicole's team moved quickly, placing explosive devices around the chamber. They had trained for this, practiced it 100 times, but training had not prepared them for the reality. The Queen was aware of them now, her consciousness focused on the humans invading her sanctum. The psychic scream that followed was almost physical, a wave of rage and hatred that brought everyone to their knees. The chamber doors exploded inward, and swarm soldiers poured through. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all converging on the Rangers. Stephen knew immediately they could not hold this position. They would be overwhelmed in minutes, but they did not need minutes. They just needed seconds. "Charges armed and ready," Nicole shouted over the chaos. 30 seconds to detonation. "Everyone fall back," Stephen ordered.
"Move, move, move," the Rangers ran.
They fought their way back through the corridors they had cleared earlier, now filled with fresh enemy soldiers. Behind them, they could hear the countdown. 20 seconds, 15, 10. Nicole grabbed a wounded Ranger and half-carried, half-dragged him toward the extraction point. Other soldiers did the same, refusing to leave anyone behind. They reached their transport craft with 5 seconds to spare. The craft launched immediately, pulling away from the Queen ship just as the charges detonated. The explosion started at the core and rippled outward, tearing through the massive vessel's structure. Secondary explosions followed as systems overloaded and failed. The Queen ship came apart, breaking into pieces that tumbled through space. But more important than the physical destruction was what happened next. The psychic scream that echoed through the Swarm Collective was one of terminal defeat. All across the battlefield, thousands of swarm ships went dark. Their crews, suddenly severed from the guiding consciousness that had controlled them for their entire lives, lost all coordination. Some ships drifted. Others collided with each other. The organized defensive formations collapsed into chaos. Daniel saw it happening on his tactical displays and immediately gave orders. "All ships cease fire. Broadcast surrender terms on all frequencies." The intelligence gathered from the captured alien vessel gave humanity its first real advantage. Colonel Amanda Foster and her team worked day and night analyzing the data that Nicole Wright's Rangers had recovered. What they discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The aliens were not a single species at all. They were a collective consciousness, dozens of different races enslaved and merged into one hive mind. Amanda called them the Swarm, and the name stuck. The Swarm had been doing this for thousands of years, moving from star to star, consuming every civilization they found. But there was more to learn. Deep in the alien ship's computer systems, Amanda's team found patterns that suggested a command structure. The swarm was not completely unified. There were nodes, central points that controlled sections of the fleet. Destroy these nodes, and entire battle groups would fall into chaos. The nodes were housed in special ships larger than the others, heavily defended. Amanda's team called them queen ships, borrowing the term from Earth insects that lived in colonies. Commodore Daniel Hayes sat in a planning room with Admiral Patricia Cross and General Stephen Blake, looking at the data on the screens. The captured information showed the location of 3 queen ships in the enemy fleet, currently attacking the solar system. Daniel proposed something that sounded insane: a surgical strike to take them out. It would require a small, fast group of ships that could slip past the enemy lines while the main fleet kept the swarm busy. It was dangerous, probably suicidal, but it might work. Admiral Cross studied the plan for a long time. She knew what Daniel was really asking. He wanted to lead the mission himself. He wanted to take another risk, like the one that had nearly killed him and his crew aboard the Horizon. Patricia looked at the Commodore and saw determination in his eyes. She also saw something else, a man who understood that some battles required sacrifice. She approved the mission and gave Daniel permission to select his own crews. Daniel chose carefully. He needed people who were skilled, brave, and willing to die if necessary. The strike force would consist of 5 ships, all new Valiant-class frigates designed for speed and stealth. Daniel would command from the USS Freedom, with Maya Johnson as his executive officer. Ryan Porter, who had survived the Horizon encounter, volunteered to serve as tactical officer. They had fought together before and trusted each other completely. Among the other volunteers was Lieutenant Ben Carter, a pilot who had lost his entire family when the swarm attacked the Mars colony 3 months earlier. His wife and 2 sons had died when the colony's habitat domes were breached. Ben had not been the same since. He was angry, focused, and absolutely fearless. Daniel knew that kind of grief could be dangerous, but he also knew it could be a weapon. Ben wanted revenge, and Daniel would give him the chance to get it. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Stephen Blake's Rangers continued their training. The success of Nicole Wright's boarding mission had proven that humans could fight the swarm up close. Now every Ranger trained for the same kind of mission. They practiced fighting in zero gravity. They learned to operate in toxic atmospheres. They studied the enemy's movements and tactics. Nicole, now promoted to lieutenant, commanded her own strike team. She pushed her soldiers hard, but never harder than she pushed herself. The main fleet grew stronger every day. New ships launched from Earth's orbital shipyards. Crews trained in simulation pods, running through battle scenarios until they could respond without thinking. Admiral Cross commanded from the USS Titan, a massive dreadnought that served as humanity's flagship. The Titan was 3 times larger than any previous ship, covered in armor and bristling with weapons. It was a symbol of human defiance, a statement that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. The swarm pressed their attack. They pushed past Neptune, then Uranus. Each battle was brutal. Ships on both sides were destroyed. Space was filled with debris, with bodies, with the wreckage of dreams and hopes. But slowly, humanity was learning to fight this enemy. They learned to target the weak points in swarm armor. They learned to coordinate their attacks, to focus fire on single targets until they broke. Admiral Cross implemented new tactics based on what Daniel and others had discovered. The human fleet began winning more battles than they lost. While the fleets fought, Daniel's strike force prepared for their mission. They trained in secret, running simulations of the attack over and over. Every crew member memorized their role. Every contingency was planned for. Dr. Lisa Grant, now serving aboard the Freedom as Chief Science Officer, worked on new weapons specifically designed to punch through the Queen ship's defenses. She called them Nova torpedoes, experimental devices that used focused antimatter reactions to create devastating explosions. The day of the strike finally arrived. The main fleet engaged the swarm at Jupiter's orbit, drawing as many enemy ships as possible into the battle. Admiral Cross commanded the attack personally, throwing everything humanity had at the swarm. The battle was fierce and sustained. Ships exploded on both sides. Thousands of people died in the first hour alone. But the plan was working. The swarm was focused on the main fleet, pulling ships away from their defensive positions. While the battle raged, Daniel's strike force slipped away. The 5 frigates moved quietly through the outer edges of the battlefield, using the chaos as cover. They navigated through asteroid fields, using the rocks to mask their heat signatures. They passed close to Jupiter's largest moons, letting the magnetic interference hide them from enemy sensors. Every moment felt like it might be their last. Every crewman held their breath, waiting for alarms that would mean they had been discovered. Maya Johnson monitored the enemy fleet's movements, watching for patterns. She had studied the swarm's tactics for months and could predict where they would move, where they would look. She guided the strike force through gaps in the enemy formation, timing their movements perfectly. It took 3 days of careful maneuvering, 3 days of constant tension, before they finally reached their target area. The queen ship they had chosen sat at the center of a protective formation, surrounded by dozens of smaller vessels. It was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, covered in weapons and armor. Looking at it, Ben Carter felt rage burn through him. This thing, or others like it, had killed his family. He would make sure it paid. Daniel gave him command of the fighter squadron that would clear the way for the attack. The strike began at midnight, Earth time. Ben led 20 fighters in a desperate charge against the defensive screen. His pilots were the best humanity had, flying ships designed for speed and agility. They dodged through enemy fire, weaving between the larger vessels, targeting weak points with precision missiles. 3 fighters were destroyed in the first minute, but the others kept going, drawing enemy attention, creating chaos in the defensive formation. As the fighters engaged, the Freedom and her sister ships moved into position. Daniel watched the tactical display, timing everything perfectly. He could see the gaps opening in the enemy formation, see the opportunities appearing and disappearing. When the moment came, he did not hesitate. All ships, attack formation. Fire everything. The 5 frigates unleashed their full arsenals. Missiles streaked toward the queen ship from multiple angles. Energy weapons focused on single points in its shields, hammering them with concentrated fire. The enemy shields flickered under the assault, weakening but not breaking. Lisa Grant monitored the shield frequencies, adjusting their weapons to match. And then finally, the shields collapsed. "Nova torpedoes, fire now," Daniel ordered. The experimental weapons launched from the Freedom, racing toward the exposed hull of the queen ship. They struck in rapid succession, each one punching through the armor and detonating deep inside. The explosions that followed were catastrophic. The queen ship came apart from the inside, its structure failing, atmosphere venting into space. Secondary explosions rippled through its length as systems overloaded and ruptured. The death of the queen ship was visible from millions of kilometers away. It exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the darkness of space. And immediately, across the entire battlefield, hundreds of swarm vessels began to drift. Their movements became erratic. Their weapons stopped firing. The crews, suddenly severed from the collective consciousness, lost all coordination. The swarm fleet descended into chaos. Admiral Cross saw the change and immediately pressed the attack. The main fleet surged forward, targeting the confused enemy ships, destroying them before they could recover. It was a rout. The swarm forces that had been pushing humanity back were suddenly in retreat, fleeing in disarray. But victory came at a cost. 2 of Daniel's 5 ships had been destroyed in the attack. The Freedom herself was badly damaged, her hull breached in multiple places, her engines barely functional. As they limped back toward the main fleet, Daniel counted the cost. 40 good people dead, hundreds more wounded. But they had proven something important. The swarm could be beaten. Maya stood beside Daniel on the damaged bridge, looking at the tactical displays. The swarm was retreating, but they would be back. This was one battle, one victory. The war was far from over. Daniel knew that. But for now, for this moment, humanity had won. They had struck back against an enemy that seemed invincible and proved that courage and intelligence. Beneath the stars, beyond the fear, the untold saga of humans and the alien threat. The year was 2247, and humanity had finally reached beyond the confines of their solar system. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon watching the swirling colors of deep space drift past the viewscreen. His crew of 200 souls had been traveling for 8 months toward a newly discovered star system that showed signs of habitable planets. The journey had been long and quiet, exactly as space travel should be. The stars outside looked peaceful, like tiny diamonds scattered across black velvet. Daniel had seen this view 1,000 times, but it never got old. There was something about the vastness of space that made him feel both small and significant at the same time. Lieutenant Maya Johnson worked at her console, monitoring the long-range sensors. She had been with Daniel for 5 years now, and he trusted her instincts more than anyone else on the ship. Maya was the kind of officer who noticed things others missed. She could read sensor data like some people read books, finding patterns and meanings in the numbers that scrolled across her screen. When her fingers stopped moving and her face went pale, Daniel knew something was wrong. He had seen that look before, during training exercises when unexpected problems appeared. But this was not a training exercise. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual," Maya said, her voice tight with tension. "Multiple objects, massive in size, approaching from the outer rim of the system." Daniel moved to her station, studying the data streaming across her screen. The objects were unlike anything in their database. They moved with purpose, in perfect formation, and they were heading directly toward the horizon. Each object was huge, bigger than any ship humanity had ever built. The computer tried to classify them, running through every possibility, but kept coming back with no matches. These were not asteroids. They were not comets. They were not natural at all. Within hours, the situation became clear. These were not natural phenomena or space debris. They were ships, alien vessels of enormous size and unknown origin. Commander Ryan Porter, the ship's tactical officer, ran every simulation he could think of, but none of them were encouraging. His screens showed the same result over and over. The horizon was outgunned, outmatched, and in serious danger. Ryan had been in the military for 15 years, but he had never faced anything like this. No human had. The alien fleet made no attempt to communicate. They simply advanced, their weapon systems powering up as they closed the distance. Daniel tried every form of contact known to humanity. Radio waves, laser pulses, mathematical sequences, even primitive visual signals. He broadcast messages, in every language Earth had, hoping that something would get through. Nothing received a response. The alien ships just kept coming, silent and threatening, like sharks moving through dark water. Daniel ordered the crew to battle stations. Alarms rang through the corridors of the horizon. People ran to their positions, their hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. Some of them had families back on Earth. Some of them had never seen combat. All of them knew that history was being made right now, and it might be the last thing they ever did. When the first shot came, it nearly tore the horizon in half. The shields absorbed most of the impact, but the ship shuddered violently, throwing crew members to the deck. Ensign Kevin Morris, barely out of the academy, frantically worked to reroute power to the failing shield generators. His hands shook as he worked, but he kept his focus. The shields were dropping fast, and if they failed completely, the next shot would destroy them all. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. The lights flickered. People shouted reports across the bridge. It was chaos. "Return fire," Daniel ordered, his jaw set. All weapons. The Horizon's arsenal was formidable by human standards, but against these alien behemoths, their missiles and energy weapons seemed like throwing stones at a fortress. The enemy shields absorbed everything without so much as a flicker. Missile after missile exploded harmlessly against their defenses. Energy beams that could cut through steel bounced off like light off a mirror. It was like fighting something invincible. The crew kept firing anyway, because what else could they do? Surrender was not an option. Running seemed impossible. Fighting was all they had left. Dr. Lisa Grant, the chief science officer, watched the battle unfold from her station. She noticed something in the alien weapon signatures, a pattern in the energy frequency. Her scientific mind worked quickly, analyzing the data even as explosions rocked the ship around her. "Captain, I think I can modulate our shields to better resist their weapons. It won't stop them, but it might buy us time." Time was exactly what they needed. Daniel gave her permission to try anything. Lisa's fingers flew across her console, adjusting the shield frequency, matching it to the rhythm of the alien weapons. It was like tuning a radio to find a station. When she found the right frequency, the shield strengthened. Not much, but enough. The next alien shot hit them hard, but the Horizon survived it. Then another, and another. They were still taking damage, but now they had a chance. Daniel ordered a full retreat, pushing the engines beyond their recommended limits. The engineering team worked frantically to keep the power flowing. Chief Engineer Carlos Martinez yelled at his people to give him everything they had. The engines whined and groaned under the strain. Warning lights flashed red across every panel, but the ship moved slowly at first, then faster. The Horizon limped away from the alien fleet, trailing atmosphere and debris from the damaged hull. Behind them, the alien ships followed, still firing, but the distance was growing. They had survived first contact, but barely. As they fled into the darkness of space, Daniel recorded a message to send back to Earth. His face was grim as he spoke into the camera. He chose his words carefully, knowing that this message would change everything. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and their new neighbors were hostile. The war had begun, and humans were hopelessly outmatched. He sent the message knowing it would take months to reach home, but hoping it would arrive in time to prepare Earth for what was coming. The message launched into the void, a digital bottle thrown into an ocean of stars. The crew of the Horizon sat in stunned silence as they ran from the alien fleet. They had gone looking for new worlds and found something far more dangerous. Every person on that ship knew their lives had changed forever. Some prayed, some cried, some just stared at the screens, watching the alien ships finally give up the chase and turn away. Maya looked at Daniel and saw the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. He had kept them alive, but for how long? And what would happen when those ships reached Earth? Part 2. The gathering storm. Earth received the Horizon's transmission 6 months later, and the planet erupted into chaos. Admiral Patricia Cross, head of the United Earth Defense Force, immediately convened an emergency session with the Planetary Council. The footage from the Horizon's encounter left no room for doubt. Humanity faced an extinction-level threat. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Blake was pulled from his training assignment and given command of the new Ranger program, an elite unit designed to fight the alien menace. He handpicked his team from the best soldiers humanity had to offer. Among them was Sergeant Nicole Wright, a combat veteran with an uncanny ability to think 3 steps ahead of any enemy. Construction began on a massive defensive fleet. Every shipyard in the solar system worked around the clock, building vessels that incorporated Dr. Grant's research from the Horizon encounter. The new ships, dubbed the Valiant class, featured adaptive shielding and weapons designed to exploit any weakness in alien technology. Meanwhile, Captain Daniel Hayes and the surviving crew of the Horizon made it back to Earth. Daniel was immediately promoted to Commodore and tasked with training the new fleet commanders. He brought Maya Johnson with him as his strategic advisor, and together they developed combat doctrines based on their harrowing experience. But humanity needed more than weapons and ships. They needed to understand their enemy. Colonel Amanda Foster led a team of scientists and linguists attempting to decipher any scrap of data collected during the Horizon's encounter. They worked in a secure facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, analyzing the alien signals, ship movements, and weapon signatures. 6 months after the Horizon's return, the aliens arrived at the edge of the solar system. They came in force, hundreds of ships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Admiral Cross ordered the fleet to intercept them at Neptune's orbit, hoping to keep the battle far from Earth. Commander Jake Sullivan, captain of the USS Defiant, led the first wave. His ship was one of 12 Valiant-class cruisers positioned to engage the enemy vanguard. As the distance closed, Jake felt a cold determination settle over him. He had 2 daughters back on Earth, and he would do whatever it took to protect them. The Battle of Neptune was unlike anything in human history. The void of space lit up with weapons fire as both fleets collided. Humanity's new shields held better than before, and their targeting systems found weak points in the alien armor. But the enemy's superior numbers began to tell. Stephen Blake's Rangers boarded a damaged alien vessel during the chaos, fighting their way through strange corridors filled with toxic atmosphere. Nicole Wright led her squad deeper into the ship, searching for any Earth received the Horizon's transmission 6 months later, and the planet erupted into chaos. Admiral Patricia Cross stood in the command center of the United Earth Defense Force, watching the footage for the 10th time. The images were grainy and broken in places, damaged by the long journey through space, but the message was clear enough. Humanity had met something powerful and dangerous out there among the stars. Something that wanted them dead. Patricia had spent 30 years in the military. She had fought in wars, commanded fleets, and seen things that would give most people nightmares. But nothing had prepared her for this. This was different. This was not a conflict between nations or a dispute over resources. This was survival. Pure and simple, she called an emergency meeting with the Planetary Council, gathering every leader and military commander she could reach. They needed to act fast. The meeting lasted 3 days. Politicians argued. Scientists presented theories. Military officers drew up battle plans. Some people wanted to try diplomacy again. Others wanted to hide to make Earth invisible somehow. A few even suggested surrendering before the aliens arrived. Patricia listened to them all, then made her decision. Earth would fight. They would build ships, train soldiers, and prepare for war. They had no choice. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Blake was pulled from his training assignment on Mars and given command of a new program called the Rangers. It was an elite unit designed specifically to fight the alien threat. Stephen was told to pick the best soldiers humanity had and turn them into something special. He spent weeks reviewing files, watching combat footage, and interviewing candidates. He needed people who were smart, brave, and adaptable. People who could think under pressure and never give up. Among those he selected was Sergeant Nicole Wright. Nicole had grown up in Detroit and joined the military at 18. She had served in 3 different combat zones and earned a reputation for being calm under fire. She could look at a battlefield and see things others missed. Stephen watched her during a training exercise and knew immediately she was perfect for the Rangers. She did not just follow orders. She understood them. She could anticipate what would happen next and adjust her tactics accordingly. Construction began on a massive defensive fleet. Every shipyard in the solar system worked around the clock. Ships were being built on Earth, Mars, the Moon, and even in the asteroid belt. The new vessels were called the Valiant class, and they were different from anything humans had made before. They incorporated Dr. Lisa Grant's research from the Horizon encounter. The shields could change frequency, adapting to different weapon types. The armor was layered and redundant. If one section failed, others would compensate. Captain Daniel Hayes and the surviving crew of the Horizon made it back to Earth after a long and difficult journey. Their ship was barely functional, held together by emergency repairs and sheer willpower. When they finally docked at the orbital station, Daniel was exhausted. He had not slept properly in weeks, but there was no time to rest. He was immediately promoted to Commodore and given a new mission: train the fleet commanders who would lead humanity's defense. Daniel brought Maya Johnson with him as his strategic advisor. Together, they developed new tactics based on what they had learned. They taught other commanders about the alien weapons, about their formation patterns, about the way they moved through space. Daniel insisted that every captain understand one crucial fact: these aliens did not think like humans. They were coordinated in ways that seemed impossible. They acted like a single organism spread across hundreds of ships. Meanwhile, Colonel Amanda Foster led a different kind of team. She was not a soldier. She was a linguist and scientist, someone who studied languages and communication. The government pulled her from her university position and put her in charge of understanding the enemy. She worked in a secure facility buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by the best minds humanity could find. They had recordings of the alien signals, fragments of data captured during the Horizons battle. Amanda and her team analyzed everything, looking for patterns, for meaning, for any clue about who these aliens were and what they wanted. The work was slow and frustrating. The alien language, if it even was a language, bore no resemblance to anything on Earth. There were no words, no grammar, no structure that made sense to human ears. Instead, there were pulses and frequencies, rhythms that seemed almost like music but carried information in ways Amanda could not understand. She worked 18-hour days, sleeping in her office, eating at her desk. The weight of the task was crushing. If she failed, if they could not understand the enemy, then humanity would be fighting blind. 6 months after the Horizon's return, the aliens arrived at the edge of the solar system. They came in force, more ships than anyone had imagined possible. Hundreds of massive vessels appeared near Neptune's orbit, their weapons already charging. Admiral Patricia Cross watched them on her screens and felt ice in her veins. The simulations had predicted this, but seeing it in reality was different. This was real. This was happening. She gave the order to intercept, sending every available ship to meet them before they could get closer to Earth. Commander Jake Sullivan commanded one of the new Valiant-class cruisers, the USS Defiant. Jake was 40 years old with graying hair and steady hands. He had 2 daughters back on Earth, both still in school. He kept their pictures on his console where he could see them. They were his reason for fighting, his reason for being here. As his ship moved into position alongside 11 others, Jake felt a strange calm settle over him. Fear was still there, lurking in the back of his mind, but it was controlled, focused. He would do whatever it took to keep those girls safe. The battle began at 0600 hours, Earth Standard Time. The void of space lit up with weapons fire as both fleets collided. The first exchange was devastating. 3 human ships were destroyed in the opening minutes, their shields overwhelmed by the concentrated alien firepower. But the Valiant-class vessels held. Their adaptive shields absorbed the enemy weapons better than the old designs. Their targeting systems found weak points in the alien armor that earlier ships had missed. Humanity was learning, adapting, fighting back. Jake's crew worked like a machine. Every person knew their job and did it perfectly. The gunners fired in coordinated volleys. The engineers kept the power flowing. The pilots maneuvered the ship through the chaos, dodging incoming fire, positioning for the best shots. Jake coordinated it all, his voice calm and steady over the communications channel. He could see the battle unfolding on his tactical display, watching as human ships fought desperately against the alien tide. Stephen Blake's Rangers were aboard several ships in the fleet, waiting for their moment. Their mission was different from everyone else's. They were not there to fight ship-to-ship battles. They were there to board enemy vessels. It was a crazy plan, something that sounded impossible, but Stephen believed it could work. The aliens had shields that could stop missiles and energy weapons, but could they stop soldiers? Could they fight hand-to-hand? There was only one way to find out. When one of the alien ships took heavy damage and its shields flickered, Stephen gave the order. Boarding craft launched from 3 different human vessels, small and fast, racing toward the wounded alien ship. Nicole Wright was in the lead craft along with 15 other Rangers. They wore heavy armor and carried weapons designed for close combat. As they approached the alien hull, Nicole felt her heart hammering in her chest. She had trained for this, prepared for it, but training was different from reality. The boarding craft attached to the alien hull and cut through. Nicole was first through the breach, her weapon raised, ready for anything. What she found inside was beyond anything she had imagined. The corridors were strange, built at odd angles, lit by pulsing lights that hurt to look at. The atmosphere was toxic, barely breathable even with her suit's filters, and the aliens themselves were horrifying. They looked like insects crossed with machines with too many limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness. The Rangers fought their way deeper into the ship. The aliens were fast and deadly, but Nicole's team was trained and determined. They moved through the corridors in tight formation, covering each other, calling out contacts, taking down enemies before they could react. Every meter was earned with blood and sweat, but they pushed forward, following the schematic Stephen had given them, heading for what their intelligence suggested was the ship's core. What they found there changed everything. The core was not a reactor or an engine. It was organic, pulsing like a heart, and connected to it were creatures, different species all linked together by cables and tubes. Nicole realized with horror that the aliens were not one race. They were many races merged together, controlled by something else. She activated her comm and reported back to Stephen. This was bigger than anyone had thought. More terrible. More dangerous. Back on the Defiant, Jake heard the report come through. The implications were staggering. If the aliens were some kind of collective, then maybe there was a way to disrupt them, a way to break their coordination. He passed the information up the chain of command, and within minutes it reached Admiral Cross. Scientists on Earth began working on new theories, new weapons, new strategies.